What if Anakin died during his attack on the Jedi Temple? What would have happened then? We pick up with Shakti sensing the approach of Anakin and the 501st. Let's begin. Shakti stood in the dimmed halls of the Jedi Temple, trembling as waves of darkness crashed through the Force. Moments ago, she had felt countless bright lights, the life forces of Jedi across the galaxy, flicker out in pain and fear. The Clone Wars had raged for 3 long years, but nothing had prepared her for this night. The Grand Army of the Republic, once her allies, was now marching up the temple steps, with blaster rifles raised. The Jedi Master tightened her grip on her lightsaber and centered herself. Master Windu's last order echoed in her mind. She had been charged with safeguarding the temple at all costs. Now that responsibility weighed heavier than ever as betrayal unfolded around her. Outside, thunderous blasts shook the temple's foundations. Through the high windows, Shakti glimpsed scores of clone troopers in blue-striped 501st Legion armor flooding the courtyards. Their once friendly presence turned ominous. At their head strode Anakin Skywalker, cloaked in darkness where there should have been light. Shakti could scarcely believe her eyes as Anakin ignited his lightsaber, his familiar blue blade now wielded against fellow Jedi. Only hours earlier he had been the Republic's champion, the hero with no fear. Now his eyes were cold and distant, his face set in a grim mask of resolve that she recognized from battle-hardened clones. The temple's grand entrance shattered under explosives, and clone troopers poured through in attack formation. Drawing a calming breath, Shakti called out orders to the Jedi around her. Knights and Padawans formed defensive lines in the vaulted hallway, igniting sabers in a spectrum of colors. The hum of lightsabers joined the thunder of marching boots. "Hold your ground," she shouted, voice steady despite the dread coiling in her stomach. Blaster fire erupted in blue streaks, met by Jedi blades in brilliant cascades of sparks. At the forefront, Shakti moved like a crimson-white blur, intercepting bolt after bolt. With precise deflections, she sent shots back toward the invaders, dropping the front ranks of clones. Despite her efforts, the troopers pressed forward with mechanical determination, stepping over their fallen without hesitation. They had fought beside the Jedi on countless worlds, but now they advanced as executioners. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, and Shakti's heart ached even as she steeled herself. Lightsabers clashed as Anakin carved a path through the defenders. A Rodian Padawan fell with a gasp. A veteran knight was struck down next. Shakti realized with horror that Anakin was heading toward the youngling's chambers. A surge of protective fury coursed through her. Summoning the Force, she leapt into Anakin's path, landing before him in a defensive crouch. "Skywalker!" she cried, voice echoing off the stone pillars. "Stop this madness!" He answered with a guttural snarl and lunged, blue blade crashing against blue. The impact shuddered down her arms. Their duel raged through the main hall, each clash illuminating mosaics of ancient Jedi in eerie light. Anakin fought with an aggressive Gemso form, raining heavy blows that drove Shakti back. She countered with graceful parries, diverting strikes from her vitals. Each time his blade nearly struck home, she twisted aside with athletic agility. Still, he pressed on like a man possessed. All around, battle echoed. Bodies littered the polished floor, robed figures and armored troopers alike. The temple, once a sanctuary, had become a slaughterhouse. The air reeked of ozone and charred stone, and a haze of smoke crept along the ceiling. Shakti's montrals rang with the screams of the dying and the unrelenting crack of blasters. Anakin sneered, driving her toward a weakened pillar. She had no insight into what dark promises Sidious made to corrupt Anakin, but his overconfidence gave her an opening. "Be mindful of your surroundings," she reminded herself. Through the Force, she sensed structural damage behind her. As Anakin bore down with a two-handed strike, Shakti sidestepped and unleashed a powerful Force shove at a cracked marble column. The pillar collapsed in an avalanche of stone. Anakin threw up a hurried Force barrier, slowing the debris, but the impact staggered him. Seizing the moment, Shakti stepped in. With a cry, she swept her lightsaber in a flashing arc through Anakin's midsection. Her blade met resistance, then sliced through flesh and bone. In an instant, Anakin Skywalker was cut in half at the waist. He gasped, eyes wide in shock. His upper body toppled away from his legs, hitting the floor with a wet thud. His lightsaber clattered from his grip, deactivating as it skidded across the blood-slicked tiles. The wound was cauterized, but mortal. The great hero of the Republic, turned traitor, now stared up in bewilderment. A tremor rippled through the Force, an anguished recoil at the death of the Chosen One. Panting, Shakti looked down at Anakin's ruined form. His chest heaved in shallow breaths, lips moving without sound. She knelt beside him, oblivious to the battle still raging for one heartbeat of mercy. Rain from the fire suppression sprinklers began to patter down, soaking them in the flickering half-light. Anakin's eyes seemed to clear just slightly, a hint of the young man he once was surfacing in his final moment. Shakti leaned in, hoping for words of regret or farewell, but no words came, only a final shudder as his life ebbed away. Anakin Skywalker was dead. There was no time to mourn. A chorus of shouts rang out as clone troopers witnessed their fallen commander. Blaster fire converged on Shakti's position, forcing her to leap back. A volley of blue bolts scorched the floor where she'd knelt. One grazed her shoulder, burning through fabric and flesh. She winced, but kept moving, deflecting shots as she retreated. "Lord Vader is down. Take out that Jedi," a trooper bellowed over the comm noise. The clone's volleys intensified, pinning Shakti down. She knew she would be overwhelmed in moments if she stayed. Accepting that the temple was lost, Shakti made a desperate choice. Channeling the Force, she flung her lightsaber toward a cluster of troopers on her flank. The spinning blade cut down 2 clones, and sent the others diving for cover. Using that distraction, she summoned her weapon back to her hand and sprinted toward a side passage shrouded in smoke. Behind her, blaster bolts chewed into stone, but she was already slipping into a maintenance shaft hidden behind a collapsing statue. With anguish and resolve in her heart, Shakti fled into the bowels of the temple. She silently vowed that the sacrifice of her fellow Jedi, and even of Anakin, would not be in vain. The Jedi Order was shattered, but as long as one Jedi lived, hope lived. And so Shakti vanished into the darkness to fight another day, leaving Anakin's sundered corpse amid the rain and smoldering ruins. Commander CC-1119, nicknamed Apo, moved through the smoke-choked foyer of the temple with his blaster carbine raised. The 501st Legion advanced with disciplined lethality, blue-marked armor gleaming in the firelight. Jedi resistance was fierce but faltering. Many defenders already lay dead. Apo's inhibitor chip-fueled obedience allowed no hesitation. The Jedi were traitors. Order 66 made that an unquestionable truth. It never occurred to him to question why yesterday's generals were today's targets. All that mattered was the mission. Suddenly, a frantic voice crackled over Apo's helmet comm. "Lord Vader is down, he's..." The transmission dissolved in static and blaster fire. Apo's pulse jumped. The possibility seemed inconceivable. Lord Vader had led the assault, his prowess key to breaching the temple. How could he be dead? Apo scanned the chaos ahead. Across the hall, he glimpsed Master Shakti disappearing down a smoke-filled corridor amid retreating clones. Not far from that spot lay the upper half of a human body in dark Jedi robes, and a severed pair of legs a few meters away. Even in the flicker of flames, Apo recognized the clothing and the lightsaber hilt on the ground. Darth Vader was indeed dead. If Apo felt any shock, it hardened instantly into resolve. He toggled his comm to all units. "Lord Vader is down. Continue the assault. No survivors," he barked. The clones responded without hesitation. They were bred and trained to complete the objective, no matter what. Snapping hand signals, Apo redeployed his forces. One platoon broke off to chase Shakti and any fleeing Jedi into the archives. Another swept toward the council chambers. Apo led the remainder to secure the central hall and the temple's communication center. All around, clone troopers moved room by room, methodically clearing the temple. They tossed grenades into hiding spots and cut down any Jedi who resisted. The once hallowed halls echoed with the screech of blasters and the cries of the dying. Apo stepped over the corpse of a young Padawan sprawled on the marble floor, ignoring the tiny hand still gripping a training saber. Any twinge of conscience was buried beneath programming and years of war. "Sector 3 secure," a trooper reported. "Minimal clone casualties," Apo acknowledged, curtly, checking his tactical display. Nearly every section blinked green, only the southern vault still showed signs of resistance. He pressed forward. At a side entrance, a final pocket of Jedi made a stand. A trio of knights guarded a cluster of younglings behind them. For a split second, Apo's mind flashed to Kamino, to drills where Jedi had been comrades rather than enemies. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. "Open fire," he ordered. The corridor lit up with blaster bolts. The Jedi fought back valiantly, sabers spinning, deflecting shots. They even felled a couple of troopers in their desperation, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. One by one, the knights fell under the onslaught. The last Jedi, a Zabrak, hurled himself at the clones in a final act of defiance, only to be shot down by Apo's precise 3-round burst. The younglings behind him screamed and cowered as the clones leveled their weapons to finish what Vader had started. Before Apo could give the command, a voice cut through on the command channel. "Commander Apo, this is Sergeant Fox of the Coruscant Guard. Reinforcements are en route. The Chancellor requests a status update." Apo kept his rifle trained on the corner ahead while responding into his comm. "Jedi Temple secure. All resistance nearly eliminated. Lord Vader is dead, killed in action by the Jedi. A pause crackled over the line. Then Fox replied, "Acknowledged. Proceed with final clearance. No survivors, Commander." "No survivors," Apple repeated tonelessly. He turned to his squad and gestured toward the cornered younglings. "Execute the order." As the channel closed, he heard the rapid bursts of blaster fire. The last of the youngling cries were abruptly silenced. Apple did not look back. Deep in the Chancellor's private office, Darth Sidious, Chancellor Palpatine, stood at his window, watching fires rage around the distant Jedi temple. Through the Force, he had felt his newly anointed apprentice's life wink out. The death of Anakin Skywalker was an unexpected fissure in Sidious's otherwise flawless plan. His pale, scarred face tightened with restrained fury. In one night, he had destroyed the Jedi Order and seized ultimate power, yet lost the prize he valued most, the Chosen One, at his side. Still, the Sith Lord mastered his anger. The grand plan would continue unabated. If he had to rule the galaxy without Darth Vader, then so be it. He would find other instruments of fear. His desk holocom chimed. Masameda's holographic form appeared, bowing deeply. "My lord, Commander Apple reports the Jedi Temple is secure. The Jedi are wiped out, but Lord Vader has fallen." Sidious's voice came as a cold hiss. "I am aware. Instruct Apple to lock down the temple." He paused, yellow eyes blazing. "The Jedi will pay for this treachery 1,000-fold." When the transmission ended, Sidious allowed himself a brief outburst of wrath. With a sweep of his hand, he sent a heavy Durasteel lectern crashing to the floor. The sound echoed in the opulent office, then silence fell again. He quickly regained composure and straightened his robes. Contingency plans flashed through his mind. The Separatist leadership still needed to be eliminated to officially end the war. That task he had intended for Vader, now he would delegate it to the military. Sidious tapped a secure comm line and issued curt orders. A Star Destroyer in orbit would jump to Mustafar and bombard the Separatist stronghold, and a shutdown signal would transmit to every battle droid in the galaxy, deactivating the Confederacy's armies. The Clone Wars would be over by dawn, even without Vader's hand. As for the surviving Jedi, they would soon find themselves outlaws in a galaxy turned vehemently against them. Sidious quietly resolved to train new dark agents, Inquisitors, perhaps, to hunt down the last few Jedi, filling the void left by his fallen apprentice. Hours later, in the early morning, Chancellor Palpatine addressed an emergency session of the Galactic Senate. His voice boomed through the vast Senate rotunda. "The war is over. The Separatist leadership has been defeated, and the Jedi Rebellion has been foiled." Gasps and a swell of chatter coursed through the assembled senators. Palpatine continued, raising his hood to fully reveal his disfigured face. "The attempt on my life by the Jedi has left me scarred and deformed, but I assure you my resolve has never been stronger." A wave of applause and shouts of support rolled through the chamber. "Our loyal clone troopers," Palpatine went on, "contained the insurrection here at the temple and quelled uprisings on 1,000 worlds. The remaining Jedi will be hunted down and defeated." The response was enthusiastic now. Many senators stood in ovation, cheering the promise of security. Emboldened, Palpatine delivered his final stroke. In order to ensure the security and continuing stability of the Republic, it will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire for a safe and secure society. Thunderous applause erupted, drowning out any voices of dissent. Thousands of senators, weary of war and seduced by promises of order, rose to acclaim the dawn of the new regime. In that moment, democracy gave way to dictatorship amid roaring approval. Palpatine drank in the adulation, his eyes gleaming with triumph. This was the culmination of decades of manipulation. With the Senate's thunderous consent, he crowned himself emperor. In the Grand Senate Rotunda, Padme Amidala sat in her floating delegation pod. At the central podium below, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, his face newly scarred and voice dripping with solemnity, proclaimed the Republic's reorganization into the Galactic Empire. With the Republic dying before her eyes, her thoughts turned to her secret husband. Anakin was a Jedi, and if Palpatine's claims were true, all Jedi were now enemies of the Empire. The possibility that he too might have been dealt with in this purge filled her with mounting dread. Her world collapsed when she received the official report of Anakin Skywalker's death. The sterile military account offered no comfort, only confirmation that her husband had been cut down at the temple. With nothing left but grief concealed behind a politician's mask, Padme departed for Naboo. She maintained her composure until safely aboard her personal vessel, then allowed herself to break down in private. On Naboo, she sought refuge in her family's Lake Country villa. Surrounded by those who loved her, Padme prepared for the birth of her twins, determined to shield them from the chaos that had consumed their father. In the ransacked Jedi Temple, Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi pieced together what had transpired. They navigated hallways where blaster burns scored ancient stonework, stepping carefully around the bodies of their fallen brethren. The security recordings left no room for doubt. There was Anakin, lightsaber ignited, leading the 501st in their assault before Shaak Ti's blade found him. The temple's silence seemed to deepen around them as they contemplated Palpatine's deception and their order's collapse. They exchanged a single look, then set their course to confront the architect of their downfall. Under the Senate Rotunda, the very arena where the Republic had died, Yoda and Obi-Wan confronted Palpatine. The Sith Lord attacked in a frenzy of crimson lightsaber slashes and crackling Force lightning, his cackling echoing among the empty Senate pods. Even together, the Jedi struggled against his ferocious power. Palpatine's lightning caught Obi-Wan full force, hurling him lifeless to the chamber floor. Grief turned to resolve as Yoda pressed on alone. Calling on the Force, he reflected a new barrage of Sith lightning back onto its source. The Emperor's scream choked off as his own energy overwhelmed him. When the blaze subsided, Palpatine lay sprawled atop a shattered pod, alive but mindless in a vegetative state. Yoda limped to Obi-Wan's body and sensed his friend was one with the Force. With no time to mourn and with clone troopers rushing in, Yoda fled into the shadows, leaving behind the broken shell of the Emperor. In the days that followed, the newly proclaimed Galactic Empire quickly began to fracture. Without Palpatine's will, and with no Darth Vader to enforce his rule, a dangerous power vacuum opened at the Empire's core. On Coruscant, Masameta and the Imperial Ruling Council struggled in vain to fill it, as Palpatine's advisors turned on one another. Ambitious Moffs and Admirals seized territory like warlords. Meanwhile, opposition forces remained strong. In the Senate, emboldened senators stalled oppressive decrees, and across the galaxy, resistance cells arose wherever Imperial control faltered. What was meant to be the Sith's triumphant new order, instead, began to crumble from within, beset by infighting and rebellion. Amid the Empire's turmoil, Padme returned to Coruscant with renewed purpose and reclaimed her Senate seat as a leading voice of the opposition. Her children, Luke and Leia, were born on Naboo and were raised by Padme's family, the Naberries. Padme rarely saw them, but she poured herself into the political struggle, determined to secure a free future for her children. In the same Grand Senate Rotunda, where Palpatine had once declared the Empire, she now fearlessly denounced its tyranny. Her eloquent speeches and political maneuvers kept the flame of hope alive, even as Imperial officials sought to silence her. Her resolve became a beacon of defiance that the faltering Empire could not extinguish. Far from these struggles, Yoda exiled himself to a remote swamp world. Haunted by guilt over the Jedi Order's fall and Obi-Wan's loss, he chose solitude. He spent his final years living simply, communing with the Force, and pondering the Jedi's failures. During a final deep meditation, Qui-Gon Jinn's gentle voice came to Yoda, urging him to release his guilt and trust the Force. Yoda then glimpsed the future, thousands of Jedi flourishing across the galaxy. This vision of restoration grew clearer with each passing moment. A future perhaps distant, yet advancing closer every second. This hope coursed through him, finally allowing him to let go of his burdens. With a peaceful exhale, Yoda became one with the Force, joining Qui-Gon in the cosmic energy that bound all things. His last thought remained fixed on that promise. Even under the Empire's shadow, the Jedi would return, more numerous and vibrant than before. Master Yoda attempted to kill with an axe someone who confused him for Yaddle, but soon found that it was nothing more than a rage-induced fantasy of his broken mind, and that he was alone in the apartment.